Hello and welcome everyone to Esports Weekly. I keep choosing shirts that match the background when it comes to this, but it's May 8th. It's my dad's birthday as we come into it, and today is going to be another interesting show for you. Coming up, we're going to be able to go over what happened last week in the PPL as well as what's going on this week, the console league, the minor league, and diving into some topics that are going on right there, kind of the battle maybe between these third and fourth place teams and what is going to help them rise to the top. We're going to have an interview with Cuss. And then the first things first that we have is me going on about something. There was actually a discussion that kind of started, last week that was on Twitter. And I want to call it a discussion because of what it was. But the idea was we have a tendency of mentioning the teams that we see in the studio a lot, right? In those player booths over there. And I'm going to go ahead and say 90% of the teams that we see here are the ones that don't have a team house, right? They don't have a place that they're staying here. They're in a hotel down the road. They come here to play their scrims. They clock in around 10. They leave at 6. And then what I do before and after that is probably sleep before and then whatever they want afterwards. But the one thing that kind of came up on Twitter was the fact that we kept mentioning that, and it was in a method that sounded as though we were discounting the teams at a team house, like, oh man, you just don't scrim. And that, I think, was the inappropriate way to look at this. So the one thing to look at is that, yes, every team in the league is scrimming. Whether or not being in studio or at home affects your scrimming, I think, is going to be a deeper conversation to jump into. And I'm going to kind of preface all of this. Esports is young. Not a lot of people know what exactly the best thing is. In fact, I mean, from my experience, this is actually one of the only leagues that has player booths for people to come practice in as of now. A lot of other esports do use things like a team house, and it has been successful for them in the past. But the question is whether or not is that the final form of this evolution. And I'd kind of compare this, football. They always have a practice field, but you can't bring a football field into the building just because, or into your house even. You can't go out back and have the same kind of practice. So that kind of stuff doesn't get to relate. So this is going to be kind of a new frontier we're going through. And that's one of the things that when you look at scrimming at home, you are in an environment you're comfortable with, you're on your computer, but the thing is that computer doubles as your personal computer, right? And there's no, to me, distinction between work and home. And that's one of the things I personally suffer with if I ever have to do any work from home. I find it way easier to get distracted. I don't want to put my nose to the grindstone as hard if I'm doing my work. Whereas when you get to go to a separate building, which is what a lot of these teams have been doing, it does open that door, right? This is coming to work for them. 90% of the time I come in, and these teams, even if they're here for 8 hours, I see them playing Paladins, I see them reading cards, making loadouts, watching old VODs. Like, it is almost only Paladins related. Every now and then, you might see someone watching like one side stream, maybe doing something as the team takes a break to get some lunch, get a snack. But for the most part, it's nose to the grindstone the entire time. And that's kind of where the question comes in. Is being able to come to the studio a little stronger overall? Of course, on Twitter, the argument kind of devolved into two separate entities. One person was, again, I'd used this analogy earlier when I was discussing it, but it was talking about the color of this campfire versus someone talking about how the campfire was made. The two didn't actually correlate. It didn't really come together. And that's where I want to open this up, because a lot of teams right now have the success they have being able to come through and work at a team home. But if you look at the top 2 teams, top 3 teams, top 4 teams, top 5 teams, 4 of them are going to be practicing in the studio. And whether or not that is correlated to their success or if that causes their success, you have to figure out. But that's what we're looking at, is coming to work, is them coming in and being able to only focus on what's going on for them in the scrim room. Is that going to be something that benefits them? Is having a team room more beneficial? Is being at home more beneficial? Does it shake up because some of these guys don't actually have all 5 members? I mean, the question still has yet to be said. Of course, if you want to be able to kind of join in on the discussion, you can just at me on Twitter. You can do like hashtag PPL, and then you can say hashtag Team House or hashtag Scrim Room, whatever you want. Either way, it's going to look really good. But if it doesn't change, it doesn't change anything. If it does, maybe it has a small impact just being able to play on the equipment that admittedly on game day you're going to be playing on. Either way, it's been a very, very interesting kind of conversation going on there, and I'd love to be able to dive into it more to see what more people think around the, internet overall. But that's going to do it for that. We can shelve that for a little bit and move forward to talking about what happened last week, which was, NIP looking really, really good still. I guess is the best way to word it. They just still look incredible. They have run the gauntlet. I think they have beat now every other team at least once, and some of those were 4-2s, but that's the worst it ever got for them, the closest it ever got for them. And that started, literally day 1, week 1, they came in, they 4-2 the Knights. That's what the closest sets they had, and then it's 4-0s, 4-1s, 4-2s the entire rest of the way. They have something going on for them. If you ask them, they say they're just willing to play jank, but we think it might have something to do with their style, their aggression. They just play Paladins differently right now, but the question is whether or not they can keep that up. 7-0 is one thing. Let's see 8-0, 9-0 if they can do that by the end of this week. And at that point, I mean, they're so far ahead. If we look at the standings right now, you can actually see 12 maps, I believe, separating them. Actually, 13 maps separating them. 21 up at the top with their 7-0. The next highest is at 7. And then literally everyone from, I'm going to say 2nd through 6th is pretty close, whereas 7th and 8th have that ability to step up. Kanga being able to kind of get their win does put them over the Knights right now, but that's going to be the big question. And looking at the Knights, the Renegades, these two teams came in a lot stronger last week. They're looking a lot better, and I'm excited to see continued success from them. Renegades is a team that I have harped on the last couple of weeks, but the Knights is going to be a team that we can look in closely today, especially since we get to talk to Cuss, because they have been in a position where, I mean, I'm going to take words from Cuss's mouth himself. 4 out of 5 of them have been, and we've discussed this before, have been on teams that do not exactly know what it's like to be successful. They were 4th, 5th place teams. They were able to get some wins, but admittedly they'd go through an entire season not quite closing out a full game and full sets for themselves, right? And so now they're in this position to be successful. I think they have the tools to do it. It's just whether or not they can make the climb they need to get there. Of course, the way they've been playing along with the Renegades has awarded them some of these key maps and key matchups, honestly. I mean, being able to take any of these top 3 teams to a 6-game set is going to be impressive if you are sitting right now in 7th or 8th. But you have to look maybe a little higher. Maybe you want to take a game off of 4th and 5th. Maybe you have to kind of look at these shakeups and turn it into something you can do. Of course, the new meta, maybe shifting things into their style. We'll have to see how that works coming into this week and maybe a little later when I can dive deep into that. SSG was a team that is kind of a counterexample of that. The new meta came in last week and they just weren't prepared for it. Everything about Atlas did not quite fit in their favor. Amani didn't fit in their lineup. And because of that, you see them lose to NIP. And you see them have a very, very rough second set starting out. Eventually, it ends up working out for them against the Renegades because they get a chance to ban Amani and Atlas and not have to worry about them and play the meta of the week before where they were incredibly strong. But coming into this next week and the next few weeks, that's where adaptation is going to be key. And that's where we're going to see it. Of course, we also saw this new meta actually take shape and help people. Kanga was able to beat out Virtus Pro. I'm going to let that one sit for a little bit. Virtus Pro, the team that everyone has been kind of favored, I think, for a little while, and always looks like they're ready to kind of rise up. And they just won. I mean, Kanga just 4-1. It was not something that was incredibly, I guess it took everyone by surprise, the better way to word it. It was a 4-1. Kanga looked incredibly good. And, of course, Evil Eye came through at the very end and announced that he was going to be having a kid, which I can't think of a better way to drop that kind of announcement. You just beat a team you're supposed to lose to, and you throw it out, so congrats to him on that. That is such an impressive pick. I think I just wrote down, that's dope, and that says create new human. That's what they do. Either way, it's good for Kanga. They get the win. I guess Evil Eye gets a baby in the future, November baby, so it's going to be the best. I was born in November, so I know that's exactly what he's looking forward to. A perfect child, as I would describe it. But hey, last week we had a couple of sets, of 5 sets overall, and a lot of them were interesting. A lot of them were lengthy, but one of them was, well, just better than the rest, and that was NIP and Na'Vi. Number 1, number 2 going up against each other. As you saw in the standings, I guess you kind of know who won was NIP, since they are still undefeated. But it wasn't easy. It takes them a long time to get there, and things get pretty close, pretty hairy between the two of them. Just being able to kind of jump back and take a glance into this. It goes 6 games. Again, they only find themselves in 4-2s, no 4-3s for them. But there were a lot of 4-2, 4-3 slash lines for them, or score lines for them. Very, very close games overall. If you miss that set, well, you're going to need like 3 hours to be able to go back and watch it. But I recommend finding the time. It's absolutely worth it. Hey, there's no Premier League after this, so that's what you can do starting at 2 p.m. But that's going to do it for the beginning segment. We do still have Console League, Minor League, the interview, and of course being able to break down what's going to happen this week in the Premier League coming up shortly. But before that, we're going to have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, everyone. So now we jump into the console league, and to do that, I bring onto the desk with me none other than Dave Olson. Dolson. I was about to call you that, but that's not technically your name either way.
Whatever. Gore, it's your world. I'm just living in it. You can call me whatever you want.
That's not how that's works.
Today, it's your world. On Esports Weekly, it's your world.
For the next 35 minutes, it is my world.
That's right.
And in my world, you're still Dave. So
that's
it comes down to that. We had some interesting games come through for this week. And specifically looking at, I guess all around the board, we had, one first-place team that we got to see this week? A lot of second or 2s and 3s, 2s and 4s, 3s and 4s that kind of came through. And because of that, it was kind of a glimpse into, what's the world without, the Flashpoints, the Cyclones, and the Elevates? What do the other teams actually look like?
And it was very interesting to watch because, and we'll break this down, we kind of a similar flow to last week. We'll talk about the big winners this week, but it was an exciting week to watch. I mean, from the PPL through the console league, through the minor league as well. Not only did we get Atlas, we got Amani. I'm going to kind of be looking at it from that point of view, looking at the NA Xbox side of things. Retaliation, that's the team we'll talk about in this region. They had 3 out of 5 new players. Credit to Blue for a lot of the stats that I'll be throwing out today. I believe he said they had 17 new players over the course of this split so far, and that's kind of the way I look at it. Retaliation came in with 3 out of 5 new players.
I want to pause you there and just point out, with 17 players, you can make 3 full teams and still have 2 subs for 2 of those teams. That's so many people, and that's not including the fact that, I guess throughout all of it, some of them have worked out. Some of them haven't worked out overall. Maybe they're not the most successful teams, but it's still 3 teams.
No, and I look at it this way. I would say this split with Elevate playing the way they are, we say it every week here, this one's just sort of locked where it's at. But my takeaway from this is looking forward to next split. This team's still going to compete. Retaliation's still trying to improve, and they're showing that they're willing, week after week. I'm sort of a firm believer in both sides of this argument where you need to stick and grow together as a team in order to really become something. I think chemistry is important. But Retaliation have shown that they're willing to try out a bunch of different pieces. They beat Eaststorm handily this past week, and I would hope that they would stick with this 5, at least for a few more weeks. You have to take on Elevate at some point. They have some tough matchups moving forward, but my big takeaway from this matchup is that they're willing to mix things around. They found a 5 that obviously works together, so I'm excited to see how they continue to grow.
And that's the big thing. Last time these 2 teams went up against each other, it was a 3-1. It was not necessarily the cleanest set. It wasn't really, I'm just going to throw it out there. It wasn't fun to watch for anybody. I don't think even those 2 teams wanted to watch it. So being able to see them kind of take this bigger stride is definitely a big thing. Now I'd say their eyes can shift away from, can we beat Eaststorm, to, can we beat Cats on Mars, right? Kind of set yourself up for the next one, but being able to kind of jump around and look at some of these other teams. Xbox so far has been, again, kind of dominated right now. Elevate in the last region. Looking at Europe, it is Cyclone, but Bust Down is kind of right there right now.
Yeah, and that's, again, sort of same as last week where Cyclone played off stream. They still have a 22 map differential, only dropping 2 maps this entire time. But Bust Down are starting to inch closer. We're getting towards the end of the split here at this moment. So the Bust Down Cyclone matchup, the next one that we get to see, is going to be sort of the determining factor in my eyes. I still think Cyclone's a step ahead, but looking forward to next split, I think Bust Down are playing so consistently right now. They actually, consistent to last week, same roster, and didn't really even change up their meta way too much. They picked Amani once, didn't pick Atlas at all, and they had a really great day over Viral. So it's an exciting team to watch. I think they'll stick with this core 5 and continue to grow together.
We'll just have to see how they can adapt, because I think that's going to be the big key. Pulling in someone like the Amani, like Atlas, has been kind of literally game-changing. It's 2 new champions essentially in 1 week of play when they both got unbanned and allowed in. And a few of the things we've seen actually as you watch this clip, Fire Stance hasn't necessarily been too hot overall for Amani. It's all Ice Stance all day. And because of that, I feel like you're watching specifically some teams adapted in. I feel like I've heard her compared to Cassie more than anything.
Yeah, and looking at Amani specifically on this Bust Down roster, the main DPS is Wildcard, and he's shown sort of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but a ability to play sort of some of the more interesting console champions, Amani being one of them. She got picked 11 times over this past week on on-stream games and off-stream games. And Wildcard played her only in one of them, but he showed that he has the ability to kind of branch out and play some of the more interesting picks.
Well, a couple of the teams that have been roster swapping as well as being able to maybe pick up some of these new champions. We switch over, look at North American PSA, and we got to watch Heating Up PS4. I don't know why I said PSA. PSA is a public service announcement about Heating Up. 7-1, 16 plus minus. Only 3 maps above Onslaught, but honestly, right now, that's kind of where you want to be. I want to say not only being able to keep this region close, because obviously when you look at the gap between second and third, and then third and fourth, there's no other really contentious matchup in this region.
Well, the NAPS4 has been for the last 3 or 4 weeks, will continue to be this way for the rest of the split. I think is going to be Heating Up Onslaught, and it's going to, at this point, since Heating Up won their last matchup, it's going to come down to who plays each other last and who wins the last matchup between these two, because going into LAN, only the top team from this region comes through. At the moment, that's Heating Up, but, they're so close. I kind of looked at this one as sort of more the same, and some roster swaps on this side. Good Lad was on the team for 1 week when they beat Onslaught, no longer on the team now. He had his own personal reasons for that. But Richie, we see him on the screen here, he came in, filled that spot, and he's a great player as well. He slid right into that Heating Up lineup. They looked really good with him, not really much fall off at all in my eyes. And I think Heating Up, despite sort of one little flip-flop, you lose one, you plug one in, I still think they're in a really good spot. They're the ones with the momentum.
It's not often I can say that you have big shoes to fill and that the shoes actually get filled. Richie, I think, fit that spot almost perfectly for them. It was still actually a lot closer than I think a lot of people were going to think, but I think that's more credit to, one new player coming in, but also Big Money played pretty well.
They did.
So credit to them for, I guess, the improvements they've been able to make. But then we can look over, again, a region that's normally dominated by a number 1 team, but when you ignore the number 1 team in the region, you can look at everyone else. Flashpoint's only lost a single map, but we got to look at Stush and Aaron Manor, and for anyone who's been watching the last few weeks, there should be one thing that catches your eye, and it's the fact that there's no longer a 0 on the bottom half of that screen.
And that's exactly what I want to dive into. And actually, just a quick kind of quip on my end. That region as a whole, I think 2 through 4 in that region are a lot closer than, honestly, in any other region. I think I think the standings reflect where the teams are at. You could flip Stush now at this point for Aaron Manor, but I think 2 through 4 could do some flipping here in the last few weeks. But my big takeaway from this week is ALL on the Atlas. He adapted so well into this new meta. They picked him 3 times, won 2 out of those games, but across the board, I would say he made play after play. Didn't have the greatest slash lines, didn't have the best KDAs, but he showed the ability to sort of transform into this new meta, and it allowed guys like Unlimited Fails more space to operate around the map. I mean, Strix is able just to hang out up top here on Timber Mill because of the aggressive frontline play. So my hat goes off this week. Honestly, the entire region, I would say, this week, ALL was my kind of MVP, for this week, just because of how well he played in a lot of these games and how well the Atlas came through for him.
Sure.
So hats off to Stush. They find their first win. They look good doing it. It'll be fun to watch them moving forward.
I was really excited to see that, except I still think, I said this Monday, I still think they could have done it in 3. They just held on to a couple of volts a little too long.
That's fair. That's entirely fair.
But looking towards what we're going to see this next week, Stush are going to go up against Flashpoint. Who knows? Maybe they'll be able to be the only team to take 2 maps off of Flashpoint. I was going to say, they took a map off them previously. So who knows what's going to come there? Of course, Flashpoint looking to kind of keep themselves undefeated. Aaron Manor, Aerial Arise, which was iTech before, jumping down Viral Radiant. Then you have Heating Up Loki Scheming, and Retaliation and Cats on Mars. So we actually get to see that one matchup, I think, that is going to catch everyone's eyes for NA Xbox.
I agree. My 2 matchups to watch next week are Bust Down and Cyclone, because we talked about Bust Down. They're looking really good, but how do they still match up against that top dog? That's number 1, and then Retaliation, Cats on Mars, that's my number 2. It's going to be exciting to see how it plays out.
Both of those last 2 teams have definitely been taking some pretty big strides in terms of success, so the question is whether or not they can hold on to it against each other. But, I mean, that's the console league coming down for it. Looking forward to next week. That'll be Monday at 11 a.m. I almost said 11 p.m. That would have been way too late.
Up late.
Either way, thanks, Dave, for coming in and talking to me about this week, because I think this week was one of the best that we have seen. But again, that's it for the console league. Now we're going to go and break down the minor league. But before that, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.
Make room. The real star is here. I've been been perfecting this look for months now.
To me, fashion is more than a look. It's attitude and lots of punching.
How's my new jacket look? Let's get this show started.
Well, just like the console league was a little spicier this week than what we saw out of the previous weeks. The minor league also threw their name into that hat. And of course, to break this down, I have Nick Keogh on the desk with me. And this week was actually, I think, a lot different than people expected.
This was one of the longest minor league days we've had in a long time. And you always obviously the ebb and flow of the schedule. Sometimes you have the 1 versus 4, the 1 versus 3. This was like the 1 versus 2 and the 3 versus 4 in both regions. And even though we've had that before, this was still like one of the longest broadcasts, one of the most contested games. Yeah. We saw the completely 5-game stretch over in Europe, and I believe it was 4 games over there in Europe as well.
Well, I know the first one that we kind of were able to kind of jump into was actually we saw Blazing Stars go up against All Business, and it ended up, like you said, going all 5 games. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that this was pretty much anyone's game the entire time. Like, it was one of the few times that I felt like it could sway. Like, the scales were just, you drop one pin onto one side and all of a sudden it just flings everything over. Yeah,
this was definitely one that you almost didn't expect to see, because these were 2 teams. I think looking at the fighting for the bottom, you don't expect to have that much fight left in them. But All Business and Blazing Stars definitely gave us a show. All Business is a team, especially, they've gone through a lot of like different iterations of their roster. This is a team that started out with Bugsy, lost him very early on, and kind of had to find their identity. Outside of that, of course, Penta and Sour Team also played against each other. And that's always the most interesting matchup in the minor league, because of how close those teams were. I believe they were dead tied coming into this week, and that's, there's so much on the line there. The seeding, both those top teams in NA and EU obviously are going to make it to the MSI. That's how qualification works here in the minor league. But the seeding is very important. Yeah. Just being able to get that little bit of an easier bracket, make it that much further. And I think probably one of even the bigger stories this week was Clown Fiesta becoming Penta, getting picked up by this new org. They have a lot of expectations, new eyes on them, that type of stuff. And even though they've been kind of dominant, we've talked about, this is a team that ebbed and flowed with Sour Team. They were losing to Sour Team at the beginning of the phase. Now they're starting to win this matchup, and they're starting to win this matchup handily, Gormizer. This was the 1 versus 2. We normally expect a very contested set, but not today, man. This was a 3-0. This was dominance by Penta. This is a new org, but kind of the same old story here. These guys are starting to pull out ahead, and now they're really, I think, my team from the minor league that I'm excited to watch come to MSI. I'm excited to watch play against some of these PPL teams and really expect them to take some games, if not a set.
I mean, those 2 teams between Penta now and Sour Team have been probably the favorite out of the minor league in general, but now looking at what Penta's been able to do to pretty much anyone who stands in their way, they're becoming a lot more frightening than what you'd expect to see. So looking towards them potentially coming to the MSI and just shaking everything up from the ground up. But then kind of switching over to North America, like you had said, it was it was longer, but it was both, I think, only 4 games overall. Yeah, both of the sets only went to 4 games. You can see Sanguine are 7-1 right now, but Bork is the one, I think, to jump into first, because they have, I mean, we mentioned it yesterday, nobody on this team is the same as the original roster, and it does seem to be taking those steps forward for them.
And one of the funny things that Kresnik brought up on broadcast was I the problem? Was I the problem? And
was it me?
And so that's kind of like what I wanted to play off today. Who was the problem? Who was the problem? Was there a problem, Bork? He brought up another interesting point is, drafting around Bitey. We've talked so much about Bitey on his teams and what a commanding presence that guy is. And he likes to play the way he likes to play. And a lot of times I wouldn't be surprised if he just drowned out other voices or other opinions on his squads. And a lot of those drafts felt very Bitey-centric, and that was something that was confirmed by Kresnik. And now that this team is almost in this new iteration of itself, it's starting to really find a rhythm. Obviously, it's not going to save them this phase. They move only from last place, but it's cool to see them kind of upswing into 3rd place now. It's a little something. I believe it's only by 1 map, and it's it's worth the praise. I think it's a new team. Priz comes in, he's looking solid. I think Bork as a whole, it's been fun to watch them sort of evolve and find footing and not give up too hard because they've just continued to improve. And shout outs to All Business Blazing Stars as well, continuing to improve from the bottom up.
And one of the things actually, and zoning into like the Bork matchup, there was a lot of EV bans, which I think opened the door for them to have just, okay, cool, play something else, Frog, and then all of a sudden they're able to find successful. But one champion that got banned 4 times that set, and I think made it through a couple times in the next one, was Maeve. And she's just kind of, all of a sudden, like she went from maybe we'll play her, maybe on Serpent Beach, maybe on Frozen Guard, to, yeah, give me Maeve. Like, we need to first pick or second pick Maeve here now.
It's just something I kind of wanted to talk about, right? Because it almost came out of nowhere to the point where now I'm wondering, is this something we might see a little? Because it's not something we've seen a ton in the Premier League, and it's something a lot that we've seen now in the minor league. And the minor league is always, especially in these top tier matchups, it's something you get to kind of maybe preview a little bit of what's been strong, what's been talked about, because a lot of what I think gets played in the minor league is a little bit of trickle down, pickonomics, so to speak, from the Premier League. So seeing a character like Maeve see a little bit of play in the Premier League, a little bit of play in the minor league, and then all of a sudden getting banned, picked a lot. Doodle started to play a lot of this as well over in Europe. Looked very, very good to the point of being unstoppable almost. And again, Maeve is one of those picks we talked about on broadcast being, you could do Street Justice, you could do Cat Burglar. I was honestly trying to break down, this map, that map, maybe against this champion or against that champion. And I think those things have merits, but at the end of the day, it felt like they were picking more based on just personal preference and my style, which is a cool thing that's not done a ton of. Usually it's like pretty black and white. We need this for this matchups. Maeve is a cool character that I would love to see come back into the meta, or into the meta period, because there's never been a period of time outside of like her little damage reduction stint where she was like really, really highly prioritized. And I think that could just be cool, something to see happen.
It kind of feels like flanks as a whole are like on the rise again. Like they're coming back in. Not every single one of them. Still haven't seen Alex. And
I miss Andrew.
Kind of don't know if we're ever going to. Andrew's coming in a little more.
I'll take Evie, man. I will take Evie. Is
Give me
high
a good
priority
Evie
right now. I will take that.
But hey, here's next week's schedule. And again, like this week was kind of 1 versus 2, 3 versus 4. Now we're going to get, it looks like 1 versus 3, or I guess 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and then 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 4 there for North America. Penta and Sour Team kind of the favorites out of Europe, but I think that's going to be interesting matchups to see specifically. Well, again, I'm jumping to North America. If Bork can take anything down. But thanks, Nick, for coming on as always and talking about the minor league and breaking it down. Who knows? Maybe we're going to see way more flanks. Maybe Maeve is on the rise, and we'll see her more coming up Thursday and Friday for the Premier League. But we'll have to wait to talk about that for just a second. Grab Rain Day, pull him in here. But until then, we're going to be going up to an interview with Cuss just after this. Well, welcome back, everyone. As I mentioned, we have an interview ready, and I'm sitting here with none other than Cuss from the Pittsburgh Knights. People have seen you. You've had different jerseys on, and you've been around for a long time. So I guess, really, I just want to ask, between you and the team, how's everything been feeling?
Everything's been feeling pretty good. Our scrim days have been going well. We haven't been able to come to the studio, but
I'm sorry to tell you, don't even need to go into predictions. The set's over.
We've been practicing pretty hard at the house. It's been 6 days a week, about 6 hours a day, plus VOD review and everything. So we've been doing our homework. We've been putting in the work, and pretty soon we hope we can find the results.
Well, hey, I actually will say it's already showing. It's one of those things. You're one of the few teams, even though you haven't found all the wins, I guess, that you'd be looking for, you've pushed some of these top teams to 6 games almost regularly at this point. And that's actually, I have a couple things I want to go down, but I guess the first things first is really you played NIP week 1 and it goes to 6, and everyone at that point is like, man, is NIP was NIP not playing as well as they are? Is Knights just really good? Turns out Knights were just really good that week when it came into it. But you're going to be the first team to face them a second time. So what all has changed? Like, how are you looking at them now that they've kind of become this undefeatable behemoth?
Well, it's going to be tricky because we definitely did very well against them the first week. It was a different meta, albeit. It was more control. It was less divey. Genos wasn't around quite yet.
Yeah.
And once they introduced Genos, it definitely changed things up a lot. I think for the better for NIP. But we have slowly gotten to the point where we're more comfortable with the current meta. So we're hoping we can take games off of them, and if we can get really dirty, then take the whole set.
Well, the new meta is actually kind of the thing I wanted to zone in on as well, because Alice and Amani were introduced last week, and they ended up playing a pretty big role in a lot of those games. So just how do you feel, like, I guess looking at Atlas first, since, you'd be kind of helping facilitate what he's bringing to the table, like, how do you feel about him as a frontline for your team?
Atlas as a frontline for our team is, I would say it's a pretty important piece. Anytime we can get more off-tanks into the meta, it's
especially
better for us.
G-Bunny.
G-Bunny is an amazing off-tank. I don't think I could ask for a better off-tank. He's really comfortable on Atlas. I think we showed that last week as well. So hopefully, he will make it through in a couple sets, and he'll be able to use him.
Yeah. And so him coming in, like, he kind of shook up the world and became, you have to ban him, and then if you ban him, maybe Khan makes it through, or you let him through and he's usually a first pick. Hardly ever made it to the second pick team. But Amani was a kind of a different story. She was, okay, well, we don't want to go Cassie, we don't want to go Leon, so we'll just play the Cassie Shaolin hybrid in one champion where we have Frostbomb. So how does Amani feeling, I guess, like right now, just in terms of her playstyle?
Amani for us wasn't too in the repertoire last week, 2 weeks ago. We had a lot of practice against her. We felt pretty comfortable against her. We didn't see the strength that she had. But after seeing how well Rock Monkey did with it, and we were surprised by that. We know that Rock Monkey's an amazing player, maybe the best player in the world. But after we saw how well he did with her, we were like, okay, Amani's the real deal.
High priority.
Yeah,
now.
She is the real deal. So we definitely put in a lot of work with Amani this week. So expect us to, play her if she makes it
to look
through.
for her, or maybe have the counters for her now that you know what it maybe makes her tick a little better. You can counter her. I have one more question. You can make it as quick or as long as you want, but just now looking at it, obviously NIP is going to be your first target this week. You have 2 sets, but for the split for like the MSI, like what exactly is your goal right now? Obviously the end game is world champs, but what's the more like short-term, long-term goal?
The goal right now is definitely to make it to MSI. We're in the 7th position right now. We're a little bit behind Kanga. Kanga is a beatable team. Virtus Pro is a beatable team. NIP is a beatable team, even though they're undefeated. I said before, we were chatting in the back room, and I was like, NIP doesn't feel as scary as like a top Navi or a top Envy. So they're definitely a beatable team. Somebody just needs to find a way to beat them. But yeah, our goal is definitely just to make it to MSI and put on a good performance if we do make it.
Well, hey man, thanks for coming in and talking about this. Everyone is beatable right now, and I think that's the thing to take away. The meta has just been shifting. Everything has been crazy, but it's nice to be able to kind of get a look into what feels like, it's actually kind of surprising to me to realize that that's a 7th place team, because the Knights have been up there and causing a lot of ruckus for these 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place teams. But we get to talk about that in just a little bit. We're going to go dive deep into the Premier League when we get Rain Day on here in just a few minutes.
Rated T for Teen.
Didn't even need to hit level 40.
It's dangerous to go alone. We should remain together.
All my colored rabbits and despair.
Welcome back, everyone, and now we get to break into it. A few minutes turned into like 30 seconds. Either way, We are going to be here to talk about the Premier League. And I mean, I just think we got some fantastic words from Cuss. And I'm excited to turn that into the discussion today while we have Evan Rainer on the desk with me to break this down. Because last week was a very lengthy week when it came down to it. Long days as well as 5 sets that we went through. And a lot of them were 4-3s when it came down to it.
They were. It was the day of 4-3s, so to speak, and it really set up for a tremendous segue into our mid-season as, obviously the teams have settled where they are after about 7 weeks or so. NIP undefeated. We've seen Na'Vi, Space Station, Envy, Virtus Pro, Kanga, Pittsburgh Renegades. They've all taken some and many losses depending on who you look in that spectrum. And what I'm seeing here, Gore, is that things are only getting closer and closer. Teams are starting to figure each other out. You're seeing Cuss talk about, at the end of the day, they're not that hard to beat. It's just that we haven't figured it out yet. We haven't found the solution, but they could feel it. And that's the thing that we all know and can relate to. And I think NIP, that's kind of what makes them scary, in my opinion, as well.
They're not unbeatable. It's just there's something about
But they haven't been beaten.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's what scares me.
It's a solvable problem. You have to solve it to get there. It's just a very difficult task to overtake. But looking at them, I mean, when they played up against, I think, SSG and Na'Vi last week, SSG was a little closer. Well, not true. SSG was definitely more in their favor. It definitely seemed like it had, at the very beginning, maybe this Serpent Beach map, maybe SSG have what it takes to push them to 7 games. And then the next 3 maps completely blew that out of the water. It went from a 4-3 to 4-1, 4-0, 4-1. It was just, like you said, kind of a stomp.
And I feel like that's what makes me, again, to go back to the point I was about to make, NIP feels so strong, and even though they're beatable, haven't been beaten, which means that they have been able to adapt to adversity. It's one thing when a team faces 0 adversity, but when a team faces adversity, adapts, and then still demolishes their competition, when people see that they're vulnerable and yet they still throw the shield down to protect the weak spot and counterattack, you feel like this is just an opponent that for some reason is above and beyond your capabilities at this moment. But that doesn't mean that that's going to change. And this week, it's a good week to test them, especially Cuss can test his own word here as he's going to be facing up against NIP.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest things. This is, I think, the first repeat match that we're going to have. So it's the first time these two teams have gone against each other, and the Knights come in. And we just heard Cuss say, we've been practicing Atlas. We think he's going to be really big. We know Amani's going to be really big, and that's for both of these teams. We saw those two come in for NIP, so that's not necessarily anything like new information for them.
Sure.
But we saw the Knights last week look pretty decent against Envy. Envy were able to close it out. It was a 4-2, and that's the thing is the Knights seem to push people to 6 games, but they never have taken the set. The first thing I think on their mind is, can we take it? How do you feel about this matchup against NIP?
Well, I agree that Cuss is right in the fact that, yes, they can be beaten. I think the Knights can do something extraordinary here. Eventually, NIP, you would assume, is going to have to take a loss at some point, just like Envy took a loss after having a billion games undefeated, right, winning the World Championship. But I think it's going to be up to their picks. They really focused on Envy counter-banning Pauly, as they like to say. They basically banned the Pip, they banned EVs, they banned Drogos, they picked Bomb King. They wanted to isolate him. So what's the strategy around NIP? Are they going for Tenor? Are they going for Alex? The thing that's so good about NIP is they haven't been able to be banned out because Alex has shifted into being able to play the BK, the Drogos, and all that, but he plays the hit scans. Tenor plays the Pip. He plays some of the weird stuff. He plays the Amani. And admittedly, Pittsburgh, they had told us in confidence, not in confidence, but just behind the scenes, that they didn't prep the Amani as well. They could do well against it, so they're like, we don't need to play it. But at this week, I think they know they can play it. They know they have to play it. It's got to be a threat for them to come out on top.
Well, everyone sat back, and I think right now it goes back to the old adage of don't vote against NIP until NIP are proven that they will falter. And I think that's where everyone went with. This, I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. I foresee this being a 6-game set just because it seems like that's just the way the Knights like to play.
Yeah.
And then it will potentially just close out there with NIP being able to be successful.
Yeah.
They are, right now, again, I think I said it before, they seem like an unstoppable behemoth. Someone has to crack this egg, solve the puzzle that is NIP.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you know it's going to reverberate down the league. Losses will start coming in, but you have to figure it out first. And until then, I don't think they're going to take that trip.
Well, what a great opportunity. There's a lot of ways to get headlines in any league. It's in media. It's in conversation. I think as a player, you'd like it to be about your play.
Yeah.
So for anybody who feels that they need more focus, more spotlight, or maybe that things haven't been tilted in their favor, what a great opportunity go ahead and beat NIP. Nobody will stop talking to you about you for the rest of the week, probably for the rest of the split. So at this point, you got to step up tomorrow. I'm excited to see what the boys of Pittsburgh bring to the table, but I think NIP SSG, that's really the most vulnerable matchup coming up after that on Friday that we'll see NIP maybe take a few strikes. SSG was not happy. Freeze God, I saw it in his face. He was disgusted to win because he knew that they didn't win well. They knew that they lost the day before. Even though I'm going with NIP on this one, I feel like this is the chance for them to lose in the most efficient way. I think SSG are going to come out swinging.
No, this is actually another big matchup for Thursday is Virtus Pro and SSG coming through. And this is actually one of the ones that I think is very interesting because Virtus Pro, in my mind, still have this, oh, man, this is a second-place team right now. And then it's like, well, the standings say otherwise. The standings do not have them up there right now. And looking at some of the losses they've taken, specifically last week against Kanga, it's just this question, is Kanga their kryptonite? Is that what's going to beat them? Or is it something to do with their play? And, talking to SSG, actually Kresnik, since he was, here the last couple of days and the team's been in scrimming a lot, it's been nice to be able to sit down and talk to them, and they don't feel very threatened by Virtus Pro right now. It's one of those few matches where they're like, we're prepared for that one, we've been studying for that one, but their eyes are very much on NIP right now. That's the team they want to beat, but they have to get through Virtus Pro first.
Got teammates, former in Sadak and Pululi. You've got people who have played against one another, regions maybe clashing as far as ideas, and Dave even making his own appearance here on my segment. Come on, Dave! This is what we have to train the new blood here.
You give him some spotlight once,
and he tries to steal it from you. My goodness, Dave. I'll have to have a talk with him. But that's that Freeze God kind of face. This is a guy who's been the talk of the town whenever he had a chance to perform, and we just didn't have enough chances to see him perform. That's why we weren't talking about him every day. Last week was one of the only weeks I felt he was human. He was mortal. And Imani and Atlas have done so much to change the meta, change people's comfort levels, and people are having to adapt on the fly. I think Kresnik's a great coach. Expect him to get the guys ready. Expect them to prioritize the Atlas Imani situation well enough and to ban it. And if they do ban it, be prepared for what happens if Torvald is around, of course, because that's the guy you're going to have to leave open if you're banning out Atlas and Imani.
I think in a similar situation to what we're talking about with the Knights, SSG are going to do the same thing, where they're like, man, we had Atlas, kind of, but we didn't have Atlas Imani at the level that everyone else seemed to, and that was a mistake. This week, they're probably going to come in a lot stronger. You're actually going with Virtus Pro on this one instead of Space Station. Do you think Virtus Pro, specifically because they took maybe a harder loss last week, are going to bounce back?
Personally, I think Space Station are really going to be focused on, you can't not be focused on both games, but I think they have to be focused on NIP. I mean, they're just the undefeated team. You have to be trying to get that win. Plus, they just crushed you the week before. It's almost like a payback, I think. And I think Virtus Pro, after losing as well to Kanga last week, are going to come into this matchup specifically with more gusto. The same things that Bersever Freeze God definitely felt by Akate. He does not like to lose. These guys are going to be giving it their all. I think they'll come in a little bit more prepped. For this matchup, although SSG, I think, are really going to be prioritizing NIP.
Well, that's going to be the big one because that's the next one up. The start of Friday. I think both of these are going to be some really hard-hitting starts to the day. And NIP, again, I think this is the same rule everyone has is, don't vote against them until they are proven to fall down.
That's my rule.
And specifically, when they just 4-0 a team last week, is it going to be enough? Like, is it a feasible chance for SSG to beat NIP? Is it going to go 4-3, or is it just going to be another kind of one-sided battle?
My issue is that even when we've seen Imani banned and Tender doesn't have that ace in the hole, when we've seen Atlas not be a factor, be on the opposite side, NIP have brought levels. There are levels to this, as they would say, where they play the pip and they still do these incredible aggro things. We were talking in the cast room and Nick had mentioned that he just feels that the pressure, the pace, and we've talked about this a lot, the pace of NIP from Triple Tank, which didn't actually work last week, noted that, but also just the way that they approach these fights, it's just to completely demolish you, to make sure you have no chance to make any significant. It's like everything has to be changed if you're going to win that fight next time. And they just seem to be ahead of the game. I would expect nothing less until proven differently. So for that reason, I have to give NIP the go-ahead here.
And I'm pretty sure everybody was on the same page as you, NIP. Again, I think for both of their matchups right now, it is until proven otherwise, they look like they might go from 7-0 to 9-0.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how this week shakes it up, though, because it could be, well, yeah, they won, but they won in a 4-3. They won was a 4-2. Like, if it's 6 and 7 game matchups for this, all of a sudden, again, you're showing that, yeah, they can bleed a little bit. They are not immortal. They are not just like, this god among men that has come down. You can take them down, and I think that's kind of the goal right now. And so the Knights, while they might have a rough matchup, while SSG might have a rough matchup against NIP, both of them looking pretty decent in their other matchup, and that's where Virtus Pro plays their second game of the day. And this one actually, I want to say, based on some thought I've put into it the last couple of days, thinking about Virtus Pro, and just listening to Cuss and kind of the way they talk, I actually don't know if I want to stick with my prediction on this one, but I don't know. I think you could just flip a coin and it could be either team.
You probably could. I mean, I think that's how even these two teams are as far as what they've demonstrated, because VP has had some big wins, but Pittsburgh has stayed in every game, essentially, even against the big teams. And Virtus Pro have lost games that we thought they should have easily won. So for me, they've all kind of balanced out into, okay, now you're both square, mano a mano, who's going to take the next step forward, because now you're up against one another. I think there's overall two big conversations that need to be had here. Can Payan have one of those performances that are lights out? Can Ricotta have one of those performances where he's just locked and loaded and he's like in that other zone? And then what will we see from Hecate this week?
Yeah.
What will we see from Dosips, who's most likely going to be the one tasked with maybe switching off to that Atlas, or at least commanding the frontline presence, which is going to be so integral to victories nowadays. Now there's another game changer, in the Man from Time. So I think that you have to look at this being a contested matchup. I'd be expecting this to go 6 games, like you said, maybe 7, and every single one to be contested.
Well, we're going to go through. I think everyone did say Virtus Pro, but again, I think you could flip a coin, and that will probably be the same amount of chances who's going to be able to win this. The thing is, and this is actually what I'm going to say about Virtus Pro while I have the second, is just that I love Hecate. I love watching him. I think he's a really nice guy. But he has probably one of the smallest champion pools right now in this current meta, because Kinessa and Strix, when he was actually very big, you could play them on pretty much any map you wanted. Leon fits in there. His Cassie's gotten better, but out of that, you're not going to be able to play the Kinessa and Strix on pretty much any map. Leon is going to be conditional for them. If that gets banned out, all of a sudden he's put uncomfortable. I think Virtus Pro need the Amani to be able to come in. I think it needs to be able to perform.
I agree with you, Gore, and for that reason, Hecate is one of my favorite players and types of players in all of sports. He's a specialist. He loves hit scan. In Overwatch, when he was playing that game before he came to Paladins, good choice, by the way, he ended up actually having a Widowmaker tattoo on his arm. It's still there. He would play snipers no matter what. He's a guy who knows what he likes and goes after it. And I think that to me is a strength in itself, because instead of trying to be a master of all trades, you're saying, no, jack of all trades, I'm a master of these. However, we've seen that flexibility in your lineup, if you don't have it, it could really hurt you against some of these better teams. So I'm hoping that adjusts. If Alex can do it, I have no doubt that Hecate can do it if he puts in the work.
Well, that's going to be the question, is if they've put in the work. We'll have to see how that shakes up. Thanks for coming in, Evan, and being able to kind of talk about this. I'm excited for this week more than anything. A lot of these matchups are going to be incredible to watch. Of course, you're going to have to do that tomorrow and Friday. But before we get to the end of the show, before we get down to any of the final wrap-ups, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, everyone, and that is going to be it for Esports Weekly. A lot of interesting things to kind of look at for this next coming week. I think next week's Console League and Minor League games are going to be very impressive, but to get there, we have to make it through Thursday and Friday. This time around, it's not going to be anywhere near as long. Well, at least theoretically, not anywhere near as long. These matchups could all potentially go 7 games. We have no clue how it will shake out, and that'll be tomorrow and Friday, starting at 1 p.m. As always, you can tune in there. And of course, if you go back to the beginning of the show and you're kind of looking at it, do you think, scrimming at home has the same effect as scrimming at the studio? Does it not make a difference? Always kind of participate in that discussion. I think it's an interesting thing to look at as of right now, and I'd love to be able to get a little more feedback on that one. But that's going to do it for today's show. As always, my name's been Gormizer, and we'll see you next time.